Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good evening, everybody. How is everybody doing? The better weather is settling in as we come to this spring, and as part of what we're going to talk about is some of the creation today on the show, but I think many of you have seen Mel Gibson's The Passion of the Christ. It was a very vivid description of the Passion of our Lord, and Mr. Gibson based it upon the Blessed Anne Emmerich, who had vocations and was told to write down these things about Christ's life. So Mel Gibson took that, some of the things he got in his Passion of the Christ, used some of her readings, and incorporated that into the movie. And it was a very powerful, powerful movie with many, many, many conversions. Now, why I mentioned the Passion of the Christ is because it seems that Mel is going to, with Jim Caviezel again, reprising his role as Jesus, going to make now the resurrection part of that Passion of Christ. And we know without the resurrection, our faith, as St. Paul tells us, is really a waste of time. But it did happen. And through the resurrection, the Father vindicated Christ, and not only vindicated Jesus Christ, but also that the kingdom of God, as Jesus has told his followers at that time and his disciples, was upon them, which means it is upon us. Now, why I'm mentioning that is because I saw in an interview that Mel Gibson is also planning to really have a lot in this movie, just besides the resurrection. He is going to touch on the war in heaven and what took place before the fall. So he is a very creative actor and director, and it's kind of exciting to see where he's going to go with this. And why I mention that is because we're going to touch on at the beginning of the show anyway about that war in heaven, about a little bit of the book of Revelation as it describes it in chapter 12, verse 7, because we know that St. Michael and his angels war against the red dragon, Satan, and his angels. And this is takes place when a vision of a woman about to give birth is to show them. Now, a lot of the information I'm going to repeat to you is from a Deacon Guadalupe who wrote these articles. This article on the end time, the battle in heaven here. So we know that St. Paul talks about this and mentions this tremendous battle where 30 angels were sent away. And Satan, I've heard a couple things that God the Father had mentioned in his creation plan that he was going to create human beings. And Satan got very ticked off about this and did not want to be involved and got angry that God would sink beneath himself and the angels that he created to create people like you and I. And Satan did not want to serve. And that's when the big battle was going to take place, because he convinced others that they shouldn't serve God either, and especially be subservient to human beings, who the angels, Satan felt. Lucifer, right, means light, a light bearer, and he was a beautiful angel. And something that probably, I know I don't meditate on enough, and maybe you don't, what would it have been like? It's kind of, because it's kind of a moot point, if Satan did serve. how much things may have been different. But again, it's a moot point, and we are dealt the hand we are dealt with the fall and the battle between good and evil and God and Satan. So we touch upon this first battle then. And what was it like? And what really happened? Why did it happen? What was the trial of the angels? Are there any revelations through the saints, mystics, or from exorcisms where the devil is forced to confess what happened? Now, I just saw today that I guess the Catholic Church is going to give courses on exorcisms to other faiths. So here again, and we've mentioned this on the show before, that there's an uptick in the occult, and that exorcisms are now being performed, and that I believe each diocese throughout the United States, I may be wrong on some of this, has an exorcist priest. But I know in our diocese up here we do. And he was sent to the training. So, again, an uptick in the occult, and we're going to take a look, again, through these exorcisms, too, where the devil is forced possibly to confess what happened. Now, St. Faustina reminds us that St. Michael was the first Christian to do God's will when he believed in the Incarnation. And we know that St. Michael fights for God, and he passes the test. So St. Michael is a great, great angel. We know that. And we pray to him. We have the St. Michael prayer. Now, our diocese has requested that after the Mass we go back to the St. Michael prayer that Pope Leo composed when he had his famous vision of smoke in the church and the devil wanting 100 years to try and destroy the church. And he composed the St. Michael prayer that would be said until modern times, when it wasn't said after each Mass. So now in our diocese we're doing that again because there's great protection. Now, St. Faustina said in her diary, "I have great reverence for St. Michael the Archangel. He had no example to follow in doing the will of God, and yet he fulfilled God's will faithfully." And I think we're going to do a show on Venerable Mary of Agreda one day, because she's a mystic, she's venerable, and she bilocated more than 500 times to right here in America. And she wrote in the Mystical City of God. So in her book, Mystical City of God, she touches about this great battle that occurs in the heavens. However, not the real heaven where God abides. She says, "It was a wonderful battle. St. Michael, burning with zeal for the honor of God and armed with divine power and with his own humility, resisted the arrogant pride of the dragon." Now, every creature has to be tested before entering the beatific vision where God dwells. And that means the angels were no different. Now, the woman, she's a blind mystic called Patricia Devlin. She captures the words of St. Michael concerning the great tribulation that all the angels faced before the battle. But the temptation to follow Lucifer that we all faced was so great. He could and did make it seem so logical that God's way was crazy, that his plan for creation made no sense. How, he asked us, could we think for a moment that suffering and sorrow could bring any good? Now remember, these are according to the Patricia Devlin, blind mystic. And again, quick note here, we do not have to, the mystics and things like this are for our discernment. We've talked about that on other shows. Even the church-approved apparitions like Fatima and Lourdes, you're not as a Catholic required to believe it. You can, and they are approved by the church, so you're safe. So some of the mystics and things like this, it's for, to take food for thought and discern. And if you've got a good prayer life, bring these things to discernment. But, again, some of these aren't approved, but there could be, tidbits of truth and things like that, again, that are worth us looking and delving into and then praying and seeking discernment on these. So again, this is from Patricia Devlin, the mystic, the blind mystic, and she's capturing the words here of St. Michael. So I'll just back up a little bit here. So St. Michael says, how, he asks us, meaning Lucifer, could we think for a moment that suffering and sorrow could bring any good? And he says, St. Michael then says, Lucifer showed us a vision of Christ crucified and jeered. See, this is the king you would follow, a king who has no followers, who does not raise a finger to protect himself against those who will torture him to death. What kind of God is this? He asked us, if you open yourself to love, what will happen to you but that you will be hurt? Look at this. The God of the universe will come to earth to dwell among the lowest of the creatures who could knowingly praise him. And what will they do but kill him? And he knows, God knows beforehand that they will do this. He asked us how we could trust a God who could ask us to do such a thing. Was that God concerned for us at all, that he would ask it? So we see that these words of St. Michael and how Lucifer, Satan, tried to persuade Michael and the angels from not worshiping and following God, because he went and asked about suffering and sorrow and how does this bring good. Now, this is a question that we ask ourselves many times in the crosses of our lives, and many people point out that, I can't follow a God that will allow this child to die, or my aunt to get cancer and suffer as much as she did before she died. And we see this way back when they were in heaven. And we ask ourselves many times in our lives during trials, why doesn't God protect him? Why doesn't he protect us? Why does he allow such evil in the world? What kind of God is this? Now this, according to the mystic, are St. Michael's words that Lucifer asked. What kind of God is this? So he's tempting. And he tells them that if you open yourself to love, you'll be hurt. How many times has that happened to us? And we certainly look at the Father's plan and the sacrifice of his Son to come and undergo that death and torture. And again, ask, well, what God would really do that? They're so far above us. And so the devil here, right from the beginning, shows his tactics of deceit. And we ourselves also are tempted by that when we are tempted to not follow God. And how does that work? Well, if we place doubt and we dwell on it, the house begins to crumble. It's the old divide and conquer. And we know this because exorcists have long been able to force confessions from the devil during exorcism. And in one exorcism that took place from 1975 to 1978, and I just want to mention something that, because of the movie The Exorcist back in 1973, everything was concise in that 2 or 2.5 hours, whatever the movie's length was, and, was able to dot all the I's, cross all the T's, and you have that nice finish. But in real life, exorcisms, depending on these demons, may take a period of time. We talked about on one of the shows, you can check the archives of the Exorcism of Robbie Mannheim, which was the movie, which was the case that William Peter Blatty based his book and then the movie on that book from. And it took a long time because of this demon to exorcise him. So it's not like the priest goes in and does the rite of exorcism in an hour or two, it's a done deal. It's much more of a war, much more of a battle than that. So this particular exorcism took place from 1975 to 1978. And the following statement is captured as the fallen angels succumb to Lucifer's temptations. These are the angels speaking now. Each day we became more gloomy. I must explain that in eternity, one does not count in days, but speaking figuratively, and according to your measurements, each day we became more gloomy, less majestic, so much so that Michael the archangel, who previously was still a little unimportant angel, Michael, at this name, we became frantic. That Michael, who was for us, a little unimportant angel, can now exercise such domination and almost crush us. Almost everything that we lost has fallen to Michael's lot. So here we see these words of these demons in this exorcism from the 70s, and how powerful Michael is, and how humble he was, and to what great heights God elevated Michael to throw Satan and the angels that chose to go with him out. Now, the Vatican has a new exorcist, and his name is Father Francesco Bamonte. And what Father Bamonte has done is collected a series of forced confessions from Lucifer, and again, that means light bearer, who was the wisest, brightest, and mightiest of all the angels, concerning their deeper rebellion over the vision in the book of Revelation in chapter 12. And we know that Lucifer certainly isn't humble. So here are his words. I am Lucifer, the most luminous of all the angels of heaven. I rebelled against the will of God because I did not want to be under the majesty of the Nazarene. I was quite well being under the power of God, but under the power of the Nazarene, who would be born of a woman, I did not want to be. And so I said, either make me like you, or I will battle against you, because I will never lower myself, never, to a God who becomes human flesh and who assumes human traits and a human body. I am pure spirit. Why not I? Why not I, a pure spirit? I am pure spirit. Why not I instead of that nature? Why? Why that nature? That is only a creature, not I. I am God, and she was put over me. Why should she have been? And I did not want to. I could never bow to a creature, one created to be below me. Now remember, that is from Father Bamonte's collection of confessions from exorcisms. Now we know that Lucifer, before the fall, was God's greatest creation. And in some senses, like the good son in the parable of the prodigal son. In his own words, Lucifer was the angel par excellence and a 12-winged seraph. With Lucifer's beauty and intellect, he takes a third of the angel. Now from Revelation chapter 12, verse 3, we see his tail swept a third of the stars from the sky, right out of Revelation. Now, St. Michael rallies the rest of the angels with his battle cry that is heard in all the heavens, as Venerable Mary of Agreda records. Come then, ye angels, follow me. Let us adore him and extol his admirable and secret judgments, his most perfect and holy works. God is most exalted and above all creatures, and he would not be the most high if we could attain or comprehend his great works. Infinite he is in wisdom and goodness, rich in the treasures of his benefits, as Lord of all and needing none. He can distribute them to whomsoever he wishes, and he cannot err in this selection. He can love, defer his favor to whomsoever he chooses, and he can love whom he likes. He can raise up, create, and enrich according as it is his good pleasure. In all things he will be wise, holy, and irresistible. Let us adore and thank him for the wonderful work of the incarnation, which he has decreed, and for his favors to his people, and for its restoration to grace after its fall. Let us adore this person endowed with the human and the divine nature. Let us reverence it and accept it as our head. Let us confess that he is worthy of all glory, praise, and magnificence. And as the author of grace, let us give him glory and acknowledge his power and divinity. From the mystical city of God. Now, the vision that we mentioned, remember, there's that woman in Revelation, clothed with the sun. And the vision of the woman in this book of Revelation becomes the victory banner and standard for St. Michael and the holy angels. How different than what Satan was going to do. Already in humility, they submit their will and intellect, and they accept her as their future queen. As the Catechism of the Catholic Church tells us, queen over all things. The vision becomes a sign of their new source of strength, hope, and grace, as Venerable Mary of Agreda describes. The great sign of the woman served the good angels as a shield and as arms of battle against the evil ones. For at the sight of it, all their power of reasoning weakened and was brought to confusion and silence, since they could not endure the mysteries and sacraments contained in this side. Again, that's from the mystical city of God. Now, a great battle with flaming swords ensued between all of God's angels. Good versus evil. Humility versus pride. Envy versus love. David versus Goliath. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back. But the dragon was not strong enough. And no longer was any place found in heaven for him and his angels. And the great dragon was hurled down. Revelation 12, verses 7 to 9. Again, the New Vatican's exorcist, Father Francesco Bamonte, details Lucifer's confession of their loss in this great battle. Michael and the others with him hurled me down. They were many, and they had the power of the Almighty with them. Michael and all the others told me, "From this moment you are nothing." I fought, but Michael sent me away. With his sword, he made me fall and told me, "Depart from me. This is no longer your place. Go into the abyss. Go into the darkness." And I had to go away with the others. While we were falling, I said that we would fight them and take souls from God. To God I said, "The power of sin will be our altar on which we will sacrifice the souls of your accursed children. On that altar, we will make the blood of your accursed children run." Mary of Agreda explains that Lucifer blasphemed and screamed throughout the heavens, "Adore me, I am God." But there was also the great and powerful battle cry of St. Michael. Who is like God, answering such a blasphemy? Lucifer's cry turns him and his followers into dragons and creatures without light, beauty, wisdom, and the great faculties which they were created in their original state are gone or darkened. But St. Michael answered, "Who is there like unto the Lord? Who dwells in the heaven? Or who to compare himself to him? Be silent, enemy. Cease thy dreadful blasphemies. And since iniquity has taken possession of thee, depart from our midst, wretch." The holy prince, Michael, hurled from heaven the dragon Lucifer with the invincible battle cry, "Who is like unto God?" So powerful was this cry that it sufficed to precipitate that proud giant and all his host to the earth and cast him in dreadful ignominy to the center of the earth. From that time, he began to be called dragon, serpent, devil, and Satan, imposed upon him by the holy archangel in that battle as a testimony of his iniquity and malice. Again, that's from the mystical city of God. Now, the battle is no different today. Lucifer, now called Satan, and we know that it means adversary, after the fall, is still trying to wage war between God's children as he did at the very beginning of time. His temptations, they're the same. You are gods, he tells us. You can save yourselves. You are number one. So this is what we see in the garden. When Adam and Eve wanted to be like God, to know the difference between good and evil. And what did he trick them with? You certainly will not die. You will be like God. And he does the same thing to us today in our intellect, into our technology, into everything that we have built, that we think we have done without God. And now we see with some of the medical things and cloning and trying to create a paradise on earth, to create our own paradise without God. And we see God being kicked out, not just from our country, but all over the world. And he tells us you are number one. And many people think that this is the most narcissistic society that has ever lived here on earth. And believing that we certainly are number one and anything we need is all that matters. And then at the beginning of the story, we mention that Satan tells the angels, if you love, you will be hurt. And you cannot trust a God who cares for the weak, lost, those who are different. So here the devil says, the Mars, they count for nothing. They don't do anything to enhance life or society. Maybe we look at them ourselves as a drain on society. But you see, when Jesus came, it was a whole different picture. He elevated those who were discarded and marginalized, as he does today. Now, the devil tells us you have to look out for yourself. Or as Father Francesco Bamonte records Lucifer saying, I am the exterminator angel, and I want to exterminate all. Now let's just dwell on that for a second. I am the exterminator angel, and I want to exterminate all. Satan continues, I want to murder everyone. But that one, Michael, always comes. He always opposes me. He always is with me. He comes with his sword and cuts me up, and I cannot do that which I would like to do. I want to bring war to humankind, and he, Michael, is looking to make peace in order to stop the wars among you. He fights me in this way, looking to destroy all that I try to do. I seek to do all that I can, and he comes and always does the opposite of what I want to do. When you pray to him, Michael, he bothers me because he thwarts my plans and destroys them. And that is the rebellious angels. And we see that's a pretty sobering words that Satan uses, that he is the angel that is the exterminator and wishes to exterminate everything and murder. Not just us, not just God's mankind creation, but all of it. So deep his hatred runs. And that's why, personally, I think that our archdiocese, going back to the St. Michael prayer, is a great thing. Because I think we need to do that. Because St. Michael's, we see from these confessions and these mystics, is so powerful that he can throw the devil and his minions out of heaven and thwart Satan's plans to destroy humanity. So as Revelation 12:12 tells us, through Michael and his prayers, he knows that his time is short. And then we see that Michael tells us, after God, I am your protector and your support. Have recourse to me. If you knew my power, you would be more eager to address your prayers to me each day. Now, those words of St. Michael are from a mystic and stigmatist, Marie Julia Johanni, and they were given to her on September 29th, 1877. So, if your diocese isn't including the St. Michael prayer, it might be time to talk to your parish priest and see if that can be done, and allow the bishops to go along with that. Because, again, it is a very powerful prayer. And, I go back to those words in what Satan said about being the angel that is the exterminator and in wanting to destroy and murder. And that's why it is so important that we pray that St. Michael prayer. So you can see from this portion of the show what serious business. Now, we've talked about this in other shows, and the supernatural battle and war that is waged upon us from the get-go. And it hasn't changed. If anything, and I think many people would agree with me, it seems that the heat has been turned up. How many people especially elderly people, that they say, I've never seen anything like this. I've never lived through anything like this. I can't believe it. If my parents were alive, they wouldn't believe what's taking place. You get the picture. And, these are sobering thoughts, because it is all about where we're going to end up. That's the key thing. The church does a lot of great things with the social outreach and their Catholic social teaching and programs, and trying to bring peace into the world. We heard in the show that Michael thwarts Satan and his efforts to have us continue the war against each other, and wants to have peace on earth. So there's a great deal that the church does. But we also must remember that the number one concern for the church is the salvation of souls, because no matter what we accomplish here, it's for a short duration of time. And what happens after our 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years of life? We're going to live again, but somewhere. And I don't think most of us, especially listening to those words on the show that Satan gave in these confessions and these mystics, that we want to be with him and should try to do our best to avoid that. Because we will be alive somewhere after our earthly lives. And that's important for us, because that is really, as they say, the bottom line, is where we're going to reside at the end of time. Because all will pass, and God will create a new heavens and a new earth. And we want to be part of that with God. You know, and one thing I've mentioned this, I think, before, is to pray for the gift of mystical fortitude. And what this is that this isn't a church teaching, again, but many believe this, that at the end of your life, God is going to give you, as you sit in front in your particular judgment, right? There's the final judgment, and that's the end of time. I just mentioned that, new heaven and new earth. Your soul will be with your glorified body now, and that'll be it. It'll be paradise if we're with God forever and ever and ever in eternity. Now, our particular judgment is if we die before the final judgment, where we go in front of Jesus, and he is the judge. And this gift of mystical fortitude to pray to is that Jesus will say to us, you see me for who I am. Would you like to come with me? And we need to pray for the mystical gift, that mystical fortitude, that we say yes, that we see him as he is, and then we see ourselves, and we don't say, we can't be with you, Lord. We can't be. Because as much as that sounds like most people would take that deal, there are some that don't. And that's why we need to pray for that mystical fortitude at the end of our lives, and this particular judgment, that we say yes to God. Don't, as the devil did, say no, but yes, so that we be with him. So certainly pray for that gift of mystical fortitude. So that is what will happen at the end of time, and that's why it's so important that we look with the eye of heaven, the eye of God, and build those treasures he tells us that moths can't eat, to store up those treasures that build us into heaven, so we can be with him forever and ever and ever, and not lose that. And while all the things we do here as a church and as a community and individuals to help and alleviate suffering, which is, what we're supposed to do as Christians, that doesn't become the end itself, because we need to focus, and you can tell from these mystics and these confessions just how serious this supernatural battle is. And you might want to check on one of our archives. So I did I think it was 3 or 4 parts, I don't remember now, it might have been 3, on spiritual warfare in ways to prep and battle the devil. So you might want to check that out. But I mentioned we were also, it said here that not only is Satan a murderer and he wants to destroy everything and exterminate us, but again, all of creation. And we need to realize that in God's brilliant plan, the genius of God, he created us to be and need other human beings. He connected us to each other because we all need love and affirmation. And many of the important things Jesus did was in community, and fellowship is certainly at the table. And this is going to be a wedding banquet at the end for eternity. So the genius of God is that he created us to need each other, to help each other, to affirm each other, to love and to be loved. And this is important. So we're connected. And this is something called solidarity. And basically, we are connected and united, and that means we are a family. And that's what God's doing, creating a big family to be with him in heaven. But we many times realize the second part of this, and that is we are connected to his creation. Now, he wrote us out of the dust. We're literally created from materially earth. And he has said, we know this through Genesis, that creation is good, all of it. And yet the fall affected not just Adam and Eve and then in turn their offspring, but also all of creation. And what we do to creation, because we're connected to it, we actually do to ourselves. So when we heard those words earlier, that this angel, this exterminator angel, wants to destroy everything, that includes all the works of God, all his creation. And that's why it's important we realize we're connected. Because Sister Lucia dos Santos, and you might be familiar with that name because that was one of the seers at Fatima, with their two cousins, Francisco and Jacinta, who are saints. And I believe Sister Lucia's, her cause for sainthood has been opened. Now, she once famously warned that our time would be one of massive diabolical disorientation. Now think about that for a moment, because my goodness, isn't that the case? We don't even know what truth is anymore. Young people, they don't know if they're male or female. That genders are now, who knows? That right doesn't necessarily mean right anymore, and wrong doesn't mean wrong. That everything is open to a particular truth of an individual or an interpretation. That things that were unthinkable years ago are now law. And things that were considered poor, bad, moral behavior are now considered good, the norm. So this certainly, as Sister Lucia has warned us, this is a time of this diabolical disorientation. And again, many, many fronts. And this includes what we were just talking about, God's creation. Now, excuse me, this disorientation is on both sides of the political aisle. And the political aisle, better known these days as the Great Divide. And to use terms like liberals and conservatives, the liberals espouse concern for the welfare of children and elderly, and yet the disorientation here is they condone abortion and euthanasia. They defend nature while approving of homosexuality, transgenderism, which are as direct violations of nature as can be. Male, female. Again, this confusion. Now, on the other side, the conservatives who profess deep pro-life and religious concerns are largely dismissive when it comes to stuff like toxic or any form of pollution or having to do with the environment in general when it comes to the matter of being cost-effective in the bottom line and profit margin. They consider it, the conservatives, a liberal matter, and they even consider it socialism, despite how, among other problems, such contamination causes cancer, which isn't exactly pro-life. and miscarriages, which are, unfortunately, in a way, a spontaneous abortion because the life is terminated. So you see this confusion, on one hand saying and doing one thing, and then on the other hand saying and believing another thing. Now, this is all said at a time when the news media has informed us of a new and extensive report that's raised great alarm over the decimation of nature and warning that we are not only wiping out entire species, but jeopardizing the future of humans as well. And if we have time to show, I'm just going to touch on that report. Medjugorje hasn't been approved yet, but the Vatican has sent envoys, and they look. It's so far it's favorable, and there have been many conversions at Medjugorje. So, nonetheless, whatever the church finds, there's been some good stuff going on. But I want to point something out, again, all for the discernment, because this has not been, like Fatima and Lourdes, approved by the church. But the Virgin Mary said in January 25th, 1991 at Medjugorje, "Dear children, today like never before I invite you to prayer. Your prayer should be a prayer for peace. Satan is strong and wishes not only to destroy human life, but also nature and the very planet on which you live." So, again, that's one of the messages from Medjugorje. Now, let's take a look at what the last three popes have said. Now, St. John Paul II, man has specific responsibility towards the environment in which he lives, towards the creation, which God has put at the service of his personal dignity, of his life, not only for the present, but also for future generations. He called, St. John Paul, care for the environment a moral issue, and said, in the Catholic Exchange noted this, that it is an essential part of our faith. So, again, it's interesting that he called that a moral issue, because when you look at it, it really is. I mentioned we are connected to God's creation, and what we do to it, we do to each other. Now, Benedict the 16th was known as the Green Pope, and he said that the order of creation demands that a priority be given to those human activities that do not cause irreversible damage to nature, but which instead are woven into the social, cultural, and religious fabric of different communities. In this way, he says, a sober balance is achieved between consumption and the sustainability of resources. Preservation of the environment, promotion of sustainable development, and particular attention to climate change are matters of grave concern for the entire human family. And then he asks, the question then that begs from us is, have Christians lost this moral bearing? Now, again, I want to point out that I'm not trying to make this a matter of liberals, conservative politics, or anything like that. The key is what we're connected, and man does affect the environment. I'm not going to get into climate change and whether we believe it is or isn't, or whether it's man or not. But I, worked for many years in the environment and recreated most of my life in the environment, and I've got a pretty good handle from work and my activity, and I'm very close to the earth. And mankind does affect it. I mean, it's kind of hard not to ignore that. And when you look at let's take the Amazon rainforest real quick here, and the loss of habitation in order to either build or drill for oil, roads. When we impact this loss, and take away habitation from animals and things like that, we do pay also. Last week's show, on the one on Catherine of Siena, I mentioned that it was a difficult time because of the bubonic plague. Well, that plague came in through fleas that were on rats. And when they bit the people, the plague started. So, again, we're connected. And when we throw things out of whack, we pay for this, usually not in a good way. And that's why, when we see the Pope, St. John Paul II, talking about this immoral issue, and then Benedict, and this is part of Catholic social teaching, right, that all human beings, because they're created by God and they're children of God, have a right to dignity. And that means also that we have the ability to be able to get the things that aid human dignity. And those goods and resources can't be exploited from one so that a few can have and not the many, but that everybody can be pulled up and have these goods and be able to have and live a life of dignity by having access to them. So that's part of Catholic social teaching. So we know that Pope Francis, of course, wrote that encyclical Laudato Si', and if you haven't read it, I would urge you to. It's quite a document. And I just want to say what he did. The earth, our home, is beginning to look more and more like an immense pile of filth. In many parts of the planet, the elderly lament that once beautiful landscapes are now covered with rubbish. Never have we so hurt and mistreated our common home as we have in the last 200 years. We are not God. The earth was here before us and was given to us. The idea of infinite or unlimited growth, which proves so attractive to economists, financiers, and experts in technology, is based on a lie that there is an infinite supply of the earth's goods, and this leads to the planet being squeezed dry at every limit. Now, you and I as Christians, I think we would have a hard time believing that God is fine with us wrecking nature to make way for our every convenience, whim, and avarice, as well as causing the extinction of an entire species. And, part of that report that I read, it's like 33% of the coral reefs are gone, 40% of, birds, 33% of marine life and sea life. Wow. And that's kind of frightening. And we know, through the last few years that even the existence of bees and butterflies are now threatened. And not to mention the remaining only, I hate to say this, dozens of mountain gorillas. And I think there are just under 4,000 Siberian tigers. And, this doesn't, again, seem like a big deal to us, especially when we don't live on the continents that have these animals. When apex predators are taken out of the environment, other things happen. I mentioned just a moment ago the rats and bubonic plague. One of the things is that rodents tend to become then dominant, and they bring with them their own set of problems. And that's what I mean, because being connected. Because what about us? How many millions of us die each year due to air pollution, chemicals in the food, synthetics in water, toxic chemicals such as PCBs, which are in virtually every sample taken of human umbilical cords and mother's milk? And that's what I meant. This is really beyond politics, because, even if you're pro-life, how pro-life are we when we're feeding our children chlorinated hydrocarbons? And, one of the great tragedies of these modern times is how people that even like New Agers that are taking this cue from nature-worshipping pagans, they've hijacked the cause of conservation and environmental and made it almost a curse to many conservative Christians. And that's why I think a lot of Christians are a little bit leery when we talk about the environment, because it says, oh my gosh, it's like, oh, those lefties and the New Agers, they're worshiping the Mother Earth and Gaia, and and the trees and everything. And so because of that, and remember what we started this topic with, is the diabolical confusion and disorientation of our time and how it affects the environment and what we do with God's creation. So here again, the devil's tricking, and we tend to shy away from that. And really, it's time for us as Christians to take it back and not be afraid of these New Agers and that they've hijacked anything, but to take and be good stewards of this great, great creation that God has given us. Because as Pope Francis said, this is our home. You know, in California recently, rains caused such a runoff that swimmers avoided the ocean because it had been fouled by chemicals that saturated from the landscapes. Now, you know, I like to fish, and I've got to tell you personally, when I saw the increase, and I got some years under my belt, but in the 80s and in the 90s, pesticides used in lawn, and I don't want to sing out landscaping companies, things like that, but when people wanted those good lawns, and they started, especially with waterfront property, when I first started fishing, it was just whatever soil was there and wood chips. And then you would see a changeover. They started wanting lawns like they had if they owned other property. And then these chemicals that they sprayed, these pesticides, leached into the ponds. And what were clear ponds and clean became choked with all kinds of growth and changed that environment and that ecosystem dramatically. So, again, to go back to California, so what happened then? You saw dead dolphins being washed ashore, plastic objects bobbing in the middle of the Pacific. And what's sad is only 1 in 50 humans can now see the sky as people did just 200 years ago, because it's obscured by atmospheric pollution and artificial light. That's one nice thing about being way up in the north or in the desert. You can look, you see like it's gazillions of stars. It's so awesome. It's like you can reach your hand up and grab tons of them. It's pretty awesome. And again, we can't make this about, because we're so divided right now, that they call the politics right now. We mentioned at the beginning of the segment, the Great Divide, that we need to have unity. At one time, conserving nature was a conservative cause. Now, Republicans and the conservatives, they get a bad knock because that went way back to Teddy Roosevelt. And boy, did they not like him when he saved those areas that they wanted to strip mine. That became national parks, and look at all the people that are blessed with that. And it was Richard Nixon who actually established what is now, the very vilified Environmental Protection Agency. So again, this isn't a matter of liberals or conservative. It's Christian, because it's God's, and we're supposed to be good stewards in taking care of it. Now in Jeremiah, in chapter 9, verses 9-11, the Lord warned against destroying nature. The punishment for doing so, it said, was that the land would be laid waste. Now, right now, there are about 1.5 million species on Earth of insects, plants, fish, everything. And sadly, between 10,000 and 100,000 species are becoming extinct each year. So we have a choice. We can listen to the political rhetoric, or we can listen to our popes, scripture, and church tradition, especially one of our great saints, St. Francis. And that's where we need to draw our wisdom from, not necessarily political commentators from either side, because they have their agendas. Because God is our creator. It would be nice if people, especially with the liberal mindset and with abortion, would finally acknowledge this. And it's good for Christians and conservatives to realize that we can save human babies, sea turtles, seal pups, and whales at the same time. What we really need to do is to go back, as I said, to Scripture, our church, and the popes. And what needs to be excluded, politics and human greed. So that report, I'm just going to, before I close the show, because I didn't have time to get into it, but you might want to check it out. It was done, I believe, by a whole group of expert scientists in over 50 countries. And I think it was nature declining at an unprecedented rate. And I think that's the study. If you look into that, you'll see some of the statistics. Like I mentioned, I think the amphibians were down 40%, corals 33%, marine animals 33%, and again, the insects are down 10%. So you might want to check that out. But keep the faith. God knows what he's doing, despite our best efforts to throw that plan out. And I want to wish you a blessed evening and a great week. Good night, and God bless.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.